Have you ever really thought about how a seemingly small country, sort of tucked away, could actually be a major player geopolitically?
It sounds like a paradox, doesn't it?
It really does. But Bangladesh, well, it's a perfect example of exactly that. It's quite a story.
It truly is. I mean, its location, which people often just glance over, actually holds immense significance. It's become something of a hotspot for global interest.
That's a great way to put it, a hotspot. Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into Bangladesh's, let's say, unique geopolitical spot. And what our source suggests is this absolute need for political consensus inside the country.
Right. And our insights for this, they're drawn from a really interesting discussion on the Policy Point podcast YouTube channel. It features Rubi Ahmatullah, who's a political and geopolitical analyst.
Yeah, a very sharp analysis.
Yeah.
So our mission here really is to unpack why. Why is Bangladesh, despite its land size, but with its huge population, seen as extremely important by the big global powers?
Exactly. We want to look at how it's kind of caught in the crosshairs of these major international interests. And maybe most importantly, what internal factors are, well, essential for it to navigate these, frankly, very complex waters successfully.
Okay, the goal is to give you, our listeners, a clear picture, maybe even a surprising one, of this vital geopolitical point that perhaps you haven't considered quite like this before. So let's get right into it.
Well, Ruby Amatullah kicks off by really emphasizing that Bangladesh is far from powerless. Actually, she argues it's extremely important.
Extremely important.
Yes, and likely to become even more so over time. But she gives a strong warning. If this unique position isn't handled very carefully with a real balancing act, Bangladesh risks becoming, well, a victim of these bigger geopolitical games.
That's quite a stark warning.
Yeah.
So if it's that critical, who are we talking about? Which global powers are looking at Bangladesh, and what makes it such a focal point? It can't just be India and Myanmar next door.
Right. Oh, far from it. Matula points out that pretty much all the global powers have their eyes on Bangladesh.
All of them. Wow.
Yeah, primarily because of its maritime advantages and its connectivity potential.
Yeah.
It's just situated in a really, really vital geographical spot, strategic access points.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. What about China, for example? They're not right next door. Why are they so invested?
Well, for China, there are significant economic interests, obviously. Trade routes are key, but they also have a strong desire to prevent American dominance in the region.
Right.
And the source notes China's had, a degree of influence over Myanmar's military and the country itself for decades, really, since '62. So establishing a strong foothold with Bangladesh helps further their bigger political and economic goals there.
And this keeps coming back to that crucial location, doesn't it? The Bay of Bengal seems absolutely central to all this.
Precisely. For China, the Bay of Bengal is, well, it's critical for its sea trade. Think about it. A huge chunk of its oil and gas from the Middle East currently has to go through the Malacca Strait.
Which is busy and potentially vulnerable.
Exactly. So a more cost-effective, more secure alternative route could run through Myanmar's Rakhine State. There's already a pipeline there, 1,200 miles long, or potentially through Bangladesh. This isn't just about saving money. It's a matter of core national interest for Beijing.
So doing the math here, if the U.S. or India could somehow control or even just strongly influence the Bay of Bengal, they could effectively block that cheaper, safer route for China, or at least make it much harder. Which explains why China is so focused on dominating the South China Sea and getting a solid foothold in the Bay of Bengal.
Securing routes.
You got it. And
Yeah.
Look at it from the U.S. side. The Pacific route for them to get into the South China Sea is much longer, geographically tricky. This intense rivalry helps explain things like the 2+2 agreement between India and the U.S.
Right, allowing U.S. ships access to Indian ports for repairs.
Yeah, essentially designed to counter China's growing presence in the region. Fascinating stuff. Okay, so we've touched on the global giants. What about Bangladesh's immediate neighbor, India? A huge power right next door. What are their main concerns?
India's interest is largely driven by security. There's 7 sister states.
In the northeast, yeah. Quite isolated.
Exactly. Connected to the rest of India by only that very narrow Chicken's Neck corridor. And that area is mountainous, jungle, difficult terrain. Guerrilla warfare could be a real threat there.
So good relations with Bangladesh are vital for India to manage security in that sensitive zone.
Essential, yes, cooperation is key for them to control potential issues there.
Okay, India's security. Now, The U.S., where do they slot into this complex picture, specifically regarding Bangladesh?
Well, the U.S. is heavily invested in pushing back against China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI.
Right, China's massive global infrastructure project.
Exactly. Been going on for over a decade, huge investments worldwide. Bangladesh is a key area for the BRI, and the U.S. is actively working to stop China gaining, too much dominance there. They want to keep Bangladesh firmly within their own sphere of influence, essentially.
It definitely sounds like Bangladesh is caught right smack in the middle of these power plays, sort of geopolitical pivot.
Mm-hmm.
But as Rubi Ahmatullah points out, lots of countries are in similar spots. Some manage it well, others. Will they become what she calls puppet governments? Is there a good example of a smaller country that successfully walked this tightrope?
She points straight to Nepal. Think about it. Nepal is literally sandwiched between two rival giants, China and India.
Right between them.
Yet since around 2006, it's managed a remarkably effective balancing act. Neither China nor India has really been able to get a strong grip on Nepal. And crucially, through all this, Nepal has consistently managed to secure its own national interests through some pretty shrewd negotiation.
Okay, that's where it gets really interesting for me. What's the key to Nepal's success? Because the source links it directly to their internal politics, right?
Absolutely. Ahmatullah connects it to a big shift back in 2006. The Maoist party, even though they were militarily strong, they realized something crucial.
What was that?
That without coordination, without consensus with the other political parties, they just couldn't achieve their long-term goals. It wouldn't work.
So they changed course.
Completely, a total U-turn. They declared a multi-party inclusive system, and critically, they developed this sort of unwritten understanding,
Like a pact.
kind of, that no political party would betray the national interest by, cozying up exclusively to an external power. This fundamental internal unity, that's what allowed them to stand firm and negotiate effectively with both China and India, always putting Nepal first.
Okay, so if that's the benchmark, Nepal's model, how does Bangladesh stack up right now? In terms of its foreign policy, its internal political scene. Because, we see Bangladesh's ruling party, the Awami League, having very close ties with India. The former PM, Sheikh Hasina, was even quoted saying something like, what Bangladesh gave India, India would never forget.
Right.
But then you also see Bangladesh buying 2 submarines from China
Yes.
and building this huge submarine base at Pakua with Chinese money big enough for 5 subs. That clearly impacts control of the Bay of Bengal.
It's a fascinating dynamic, isn't it? On the surface, yeah, some might look at that and say, okay, the government is skillfully playing its cards, leveraging one against the other.
Like playing both sides.
Exactly. But Ahmatullah argues that without that deep internal political consensus, without real national unity, that approach is actually quite dangerous for Bangladesh, fraught with risk.
That's interesting, because playing both sides often looks like smart diplomacy. What's the hidden danger there, according to the source, without that internal agreement?
It boils down to resilience, really. The internal strength you get from national unity among political parties, that's what truly lets a nation push back against external pressures. It allows you to maintain good relations with everyone without getting dragged into fights or becoming, dependent on just one power.
Okay.
Take Bangladesh's economy, for instance. It's quite vulnerable in some ways. If the U.S., say, suddenly stopped exports, Bangladesh relies so heavily on the garment industry.
A huge part of their exports, yeah.
It could trigger a severe economic crisis. So you have China, the U.S., even Europe, all with big interests in Bangladesh. The goal has to be balancing these for a win-win for Bangladesh, not just, keeping one side happy.
So going back to that quote about giving to India.
Yeah.
If the focus has been on giving, what has Bangladesh actually gotten in return from its current approach, according to Ahmatullah?
Well, her argument is that if a multi-party consensus on national interest had been solid, the focus would always be on what do we get before deciding what we give.
Right, the negotiation aspect.
Exactly. In her view, Bangladesh has given perhaps too much without getting enough back. For example, she points to the disenfranchisement of millions in 3 elections and the weakening of institutions as potentially stemming from appeasing one foreign power. And these are significant domestic setbacks that directly affect the country's bargaining power and internal stability.
It sounds like it fundamentally comes down to sovereignty, really. Self-respect on the world stage.
Yeah.
A bit like Nepal. Again, they famously refused India's request for a coal plant, right? Similar to the Rampal one.
That's right.
And they also apparently said no to a Chinese corridor, even with big offers on the table.
Precisely. Nepal stood its ground based on its national interest. And importantly, both China and India respected those decisions in the end. It just shows that even a smaller country can get better terms, can command respect, if it speaks with a unified voice based on its own interests.
Which brings us back to the Bay of Bengal itself, its inherent value. It's not just land. The sea holds massive potential protein, gas, oil.
Huge potential.
So for Bangladesh, playing its geopolitical cards right, using those resources, using its large population as leverage, it seems paramount.
It's all about negotiating for that win-win, where there's a real give and take, and no single power tries to dominate or turn Bangladesh into what, might be seen as a vassal state.
The vessel state.
And when a country loses public trust, loses internal cohesion, as the source suggests might be happening in Bangladesh, that's a huge problem. External powers, too, have historically paid a high price for alienating populations. Think about America in Iran, or even Myanmar. It just creates long-term instability for everyone.
And then there's the Rohingya crisis. We have to touch on that. Bangladesh is hosting over 1 million refugees.
An enormous burden.
Sometimes outnumbering locals in certain areas. It's a humanitarian disaster, yes, but also creating serious law and order problems. And with potential shifts in, say, U.S. support, depending on administrations, Bangladesh can't possibly solve this alone.
Absolutely not. This isn't just a local Bangladeshi problem, it's a regional one. And it definitely needs a sophisticated geopolitical play to resolve.
So a better strategy, guided by internal consensus, could help.
That's the argument. If Bangladesh can refine its strategy, backed by that internal unity, it can bring these regional issues into a better balance, seek meaningful international support. I mean, if Nepal, a landlocked nation, can manage its balancing act,
Then Bangladesh, with its strategic Bay of Bengal access.
should arguably be even more capable.
Right. It really makes you think. So, pulling this all together, what does this tell us about global power dynamics going forward? And, where does a country's sovereignty really begin when these major powers are constantly looking for a strategic advantage, a foothold?
Well, it seems the true strength of a nation, even one that looks small on the map, might not just be its location or its resources.
That's something else.
Perhaps it lies more in its ability to create that internal unity, to stand firm on its own national interests, even under intense external pressure.
So the silent power of a unified people, perhaps.